The 90s promised mainstream appeal and four-quadrant filmmaking, but a handful of films ignored the playbook entirely, collapsed at the box office, and then quietly refused to stay buried. These are the box office bombs that audiences somehow rescued from obscurity. Freeway is a pitch-black reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood, where a foul-mouthed teenager hitchhikes to her grandmother's house, gets picked up by a serial killer posing as a school counselor, and fights back with genuine ferocity. Before Reese Witherspoon became America's sweetheart, she delivered a performance so raw the director compared it to watching Jimi Hendrix at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and the industry had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Witherspoon was only 20 and already being pushed toward ingenue roles, but she fought for this R-rated indie because she wanted to play someone who could completely lose control. The scene where she recounts her history of abuse reportedly left the crew in stunned silence, delivered with hard-edged fury and heartbreaking naivety that felt dangerously real. Republic Pictures eventually dumped it into a handful of theaters where it made just $295,000 against roughly $3 million. The film premiered at Sundance and polarized audiences, so intensely that critics openly hissed during scenes of dark humor. That theatrical death just pushed it onto HBO and home video, where it somehow became one of the most successful cult rentals of the late 90s. True romance tracks an Elvis-obsessed comic book clerk who accidentally steals millions in mafia cocaine and flees to Los Angeles with both the mob and the LAPD chasing him. Years before he became Tony Soprano, James Gandolfini stayed in a flea-ridden motel and refused to sleep for days to prepare for one hotel room fight scene that would eventually redefine his career. James plays Virgil, and according to Patricia Arquette, he stayed in character throughout the shoot, maintaining a menacing silence that genuinely frightened her. During filming, he encouraged Arquette to actually hit him and use the corkscrew with real force, creating a survival response that made the scene feel like documentation rather than choreography. The fight took 5 days to film in a cramped, overheated room, eventually catching the attention of casting directors who would later offer him The Sopranos. Despite a cast including Brad Pitt, Christopher Walken, and Dennis Hopper, the film bombed hard, grossing only $12.3 million against $13 million. The studio botched the marketing so badly they couldn't decide if it was a romantic comedy or a violent thriller. Tarantino had sold the script for around $30,000 just to fund Reservoir Dogs, seeing almost none of the home video profits that eventually turned this bomb into a cult essential. California puts a journalist and his photographer girlfriend on a cross-country trip to visit murder sites, posting a rideshare ad that gets answered by a paroled laborer who turns out to be an actual monster. Brad Pitt voluntarily chipped his front tooth, refused to wash for weeks, and leaned so hard into playing a serial killer that his co-stars reportedly felt genuine unease around him, scaring off mainstream audiences in the process. Pitt had a childhood cap removed to reveal a jagged tooth because he felt his looks hindered the character's predator vibe. He isolated himself with real-life girlfriend Juliette Lewis to maintain an us-against-the-world mentality that made David Duchovny and Michelle Forbes feel like genuine outsiders. Lewis was only 19 and fresh off a Cape Fear Oscar nomination, pushing Adele to a place of infantile vulnerability many found difficult to watch. The mental toll of playing an abuse victim alongside her actual partner playing the abuser was significant. Director Dominic Sena rewrote the script 10 different times, ballooning the budget from roughly $4.5 million to $8.5 million. The film earned only $2.4 million during a summer dominated by Jurassic Park. The failure is studied as right movie, wrong time, predating the serial killer obsession of Seven by just 2 years. Miller's Crossing centers on Tom Reagan, the right-hand man to an Irish mob boss, who gets caught in shifting loyalties when he becomes involved with his boss's mistress, who happens to be the sister of a bookie the rival Italian gang wants dead. The Coen brothers hit a wall so massive while writing it that they stopped entirely, took a 3-week break, wrote the entire script for Barton Fink about a writer who can't write, and then returned with darker energy that helped finish the mob war plot, but pushed the schedule and contributed to slow burn pacing that confused mainstream audiences. Gabriel Byrne wasn't the first choice, and spent production convinced he was doing a terrible job, struggling with the Coen brothers' no improvisation rule and demand for absolute precision in every syllable. Despite his stellar performance, the film was a financial catastrophe, grossing just over $5 million against $10 million. Audiences looking for mob violence chose Scorsese's high-energy, accessible film when it opened just days after Goodfellas, and Miller's Crossing earned only $1 million opening weekend before being pulled from theaters. Fox had absolutely no idea how to market the unique Coen speak and stylized 30s aesthetics, but the viral afterlife is significant, becoming a film school staple and eventually cited by the American Film Institute as one of the greatest gangster films ever made. The Hudsucker Proxy turns a naive mailroom clerk into the president of Hudsucker Industries as part of a stock market scheme, only to watch him accidentally save the company when his simple circle drawing becomes the hula hoop. The Coen brothers and Sam Raimi wrote the script in 1985, but couldn't get it made for nearly a decade because it was deemed too weird and expensive, and when it finally hit theaters with a $25 million budget, it grossed just $1.1 million in its first 5 days. Raimi's influence is visible in the kinetic sequences like the suicide leap and the frantic hula hoop montage, which required hundreds of extras, trained to use the toy simultaneously. The viral detail is that the Circle Norville shows everyone was actually a drawing Raimi made during a brainstorming session. Casting Paul Newman as the villain brought a clash of eras, with Newman reportedly baffled by the storyboard-driven approach to create the towering world of Hudsucker Industries. The production built a 1/20th scale Manhattan that took up an entire soundstage, using complex motion control cameras and physical models that drove costs insanely high for a screwball comedy. When released in March 1994, it was met with near total indifference, earning only $2.8 million total. Warner Brothers viewed the Coens as unmarketable for big-budget projects for years, but the film eventually found cult status on cable in the late 90s. The ice storm watches two families in 1973 suburban Connecticut unravel during Thanksgiving weekend, with parents having affairs and attending key parties while their children experiment with drugs and sex as a record-breaking ice storm rolls in. Ang Lee insisted on filming in actual freezing conditions to capture visible breath and genuine shivers, drenching Tobey Maguire and Katie Holmes in cold water and ice for hours, prioritizing the image over actor comfort. The central key party scene where adults throw car keys into a bowl to choose random partners was a major sticking point for marketing. Fox Searchlight struggled to sell a movie about 70s swinging to a 90s audience, especially when portrayed with such crushing sadness that it alienated viewers looking for retro fun. Lee used a unique method of isolating cast members, giving each actor a secret dossier the others couldn't see, creating genuine distance on set that mirrored the character's emotional state. Sigourney Weaver and Kevin Kline reportedly felt creative coldness from Lee, which he intentionally cultivated to keep performances from becoming too warm. The film was a financial disaster, losing over $10 million and earning only $8 million against $18 million. The fallout shifted how period dramas were produced, with the industry shying away from unpleasant aspects of the 70s in favor of upbeat nostalgia, but the film is now cited as a masterpiece of uncomfortable cinema. Lost Highway bombed so hard that Lynch leaned into the hate, using Siskel and Ebert's Two Thumbs Down as a headline to prove the film was too radical for the mainstream. Despite this aggressive anti-marketing, the film grossed only $3.7 million against $15 million, marking Lynch's move away from traditional studios. The story follows a jazz saxophonist who receives mysterious VHS tapes of himself sleeping, gets arrested for murdering his wife despite no memory of it, and then inexplicably transforms on death row into a young man living a completely different life. Lynch cast Robert Blake as the terrifying mystery man, wearing white kabuki makeup and refusing to blink on camera to create a supernatural vibe. Chillingly, just 4 years after the film's release, Robert Blake was arrested and tried for the real-life murder of his wife, creating disturbing parallels that retroactively made his scenes some of the most unnerving in cinema history. Red Rock West was declared unmarketable by Columbia TriStar and dumped straight to HBO, where it aired 7 times before a small distributor saw it at a festival and begged for a theatrical run. By the time it finally hit theaters in 1994, it was technically a re-release of a movie people had already seen for free, yet it still grossed $2.5 million in limited release, proving the studio completely misjudged its potential. The plot is pure noir. An honest drifter gets mistaken for a hitman, takes the money to kill someone's wife, tries to warn her instead, and then runs into the actual hitman from Dallas. Director John Dahl shot in freezing Montana winter, and the physical toll was real, with actors performing stunts in deep mud and biting wind. The energy on set was defined by the contrast between Nicolas Cage's internal brooding and Dennis Hopper's explosive portrayal. Hopper was in career resurgence mode, playing high-octane villains, improvising menacing traits that kept Cage genuinely on edge during their shared scenes. The film's journey to theaters was plagued by technical errors, with the editor admitting he made amateur reel changeover mistakes that caused projectionists to accidentally cut off key shots during screenings. The studio sold domestic rights for $2.5 million and walked away, but San Francisco cinephiles eventually rescued it from cable obscurity. Out of Sight traps career bank robber Jack Foley in a trunk with Karen Siskel, a federal marshal, during a prison break, sparking a cross-country chase where he heads to Detroit for one last score while she pursues him, torn between duty and desire. The most famous scene was shot not as a kidnapping, but as a bedroom scene, with tight angles and low-light cinematography that made you forget they were captive and captor. This was a massive risk, because the original novel described Karen Siskel as skinny and blonde, nothing like Lopez, but the director fought for her casting because of her grit and seductiveness. The chemistry was so palpable, Roger Ebert compared them to Bogart and Bacall. For Clooney, this was his last chance at a movie career, after Batman and Robin left him widely considered a television actor who couldn't carry a film. Despite critical acclaim, the film was a massive disappointment, grossing only $77.7 million worldwide against a $48 million budget. Universal had absolutely no idea how to market a cool intellectual crime movie in the same summer as Armageddon. While it tanked financially, the film saved Clooney's career, leading directly to the Ocean's franchise and became a textbook for modern editing on home video. Dark City opens with John Murdoch waking up with no memory and a murdered woman nearby, then throws him into a metropolis where the sun never rises and buildings physically rearrange themselves at midnight. The Matrix literally reused Dark City sets because both films were shot at Fox Studios in Australia, and when Alex Proyas's reality-bending noir finished as a financial disaster, the Wachowskis bought the rooftop where Trinity escapes the agents. The films share the same colorist and crew members, explaining the strikingly similar green-tinted rainy aesthetic, but while The Matrix became a billion-dollar franchise, Dark City was crushed by Titanic in its 11th week. The strangers pause time to rewrite lives like components in a massive experiment, and Murdoch discovers he can manipulate reality just like them. New Line put $27 million into production, but the dense noir pacing clashed with audiences expecting high-speed sci-fi action. The studio interference that killed the film's mystery happened in the editing room, where executives forced Proyas to add opening narration explaining exactly who the strangers are, spoiling the central mystery in roughly 30 seconds. The film died on arrival, with only $14 million domestically. Despite matching its production budget worldwide at $27.2 million, there was zero room for marketing costs, leaving New Line with a total loss. The director's cut years later, which removed the narration, was finally recognized as a masterpiece.